best Yu-Gi-Oh decks post YCS Brazil. My guy, my friend,
my brother in Christ. You like that I could do that, don't you?
In today's video, I'm going to be giving you what I think are the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! I have 5 different categories to be able to separate these particular strategies from, and you can decide if your boy is cooking or, well, if I'm big cooking, because I ain't getting these wrong. This tier list is incredibly important if you want to win the next big event that just so happens to be this weekend, or if you're just trying to impress your friends with Yu-Gi-Oh knowledge. My guy, if you notice, the ladies love you, the guys want to be like you, and everything in between, they just envy you, big dog. So let's jump on in. Let's go ahead and start off with Branded. I think that this deck is incredibly powerful, even stronger than what some of you players may think, because Unchained is one of the best decks in the game. Ironically, one of the better counters against Unchained should easily be considered one of the best decks in the game. Through my weeks upon weeks of playtesting Unchained, one of the scariest matchups is Branded, and it's because of Mirror Jade. Mirror Jade is pretty good against Unchained because you get to banish the Unchained monsters instead of destroying them, and also when they get rid of Mirror Jade, if they want to establish a board, well, they're going to lose that too, meaning that it's going to be a little bit harder to make DDD Wave King Caesar. Also, because Branded lost, it actually becomes a little bit harder for Unchained to be able to interrupt Branded. I think that the pure version is really strong right now. But then that actually leaves us back to Chimera, which I think it's peculiar. In our last tier list, I said that Branded Chimera was stronger than pure Branded, but because of the advantages of the Branded cards being able to play against the Unchained strategy, I would say that this deck is really good still, but I like the advantages of pure Branded. Don't get me wrong, big dogs, the Chimera strategy is still some dogs. They got that dog in them. Offering a unique perspective to be able to make cards like Guardian Chimera on your opponent's turn and destroy multiple cards, as well as rip resources out of your opponent's hand before they can play them, this deck is still extremely strong. I think that Dragons are also another really good deck against Unchained. The reason why is because, Heretic Seal of Heavenly Spheres. Seriously, that card is crazy. Through my experience of playing Unchained, it's kind of die rolly. If the Dragon deck goes first and establishes board, it becomes really hard for Unchained to be able to play through that, especially if you're playing the hand trap version of Unchained, something that a lot of players are playing. Dragons just don't care. But if you go first, you can make enough interruptions to stop Dragons. Dragons overall are a very powerful strategy in the game, and I think are still a solid deck going into the next weekend. Also, my guy, those bestial monsters, disruptive. I think that Floowandereeze in the takes a really good pilot. Some of the blowout cards that Floowandereeze would normally play, like Dimension Shifter, doesn't do as powerful, but this strategy is still pretty good at being able to counter the meta if you know what you're doing. The only bad thing about Floowandereeze is blowout Yu-Gi-Oh cards. You tend to lose to those a decent amount. I also think that Runic is another strategy that takes a really good pilot. Being able to use Runic Freezing Curses to not only interact with the DDD Wave King Caesar, but also the Unchained Soul of Rage is kind of crazy. But the problem with that is, if they establish Wave King Caesar, boy, you kind of cooked. Kashtira also has a pretty solid matchup against you, though you can dodge a lot of hand traps if you play this deck correctly, and that's why I think it takes a good pilot. I would 100% say Infernobles are still experimental. I've seen a lot of Infernoble builds actually play around some of the hand traps that have been plaguing it. With less Droll and Logbird, this deck can actually be a lot better. But the reason why I put it in experimental is that I haven't necessarily seen enough data, and I know that Infernoble doesn't have a really solid matchup against some of the better decks. Kashtira, my boy. After getting slapped in the face, shoo, I still gotta put you as one of the best decks. Now, if it were in order, it would definitely be Kashtira first, Branded second, though I will say Branded can play around Kashtira, and it does a pretty good job. But the reason why Kashtira is still one of the best decks is because it's still simply just overpowered. My guy, have you read Kashtira Birth? That card's insane! Kashtira is still a deck that can play for free, as well as use some of the most powerful cards in the game to its advantage. I think that Kashtira is still one of the better decks for now, until the Forbidden List maybe. So Labyrinth has one really good thing going. You don't automatically lose to Wave King Caesar if you're going second, but you gain special summon still. I'm gonna put Labyrinth in solid choice. I don't think that it's a bad deck. It still does have its problems, like players mainboarding Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, inciting Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion, but this deck actually does have some benefits. One being able to play some of the most blowout trap cards in the game and then being able to search them. I think a card that a lot of players should look into is Terrors of the Overroot. This card allows you to swap out a lot of the problematic cards that you may see as a Labyrinth player, and keep in mind, big dog, Silver Lady of the Labyrinth cannot be targeted when you have a face down card. That can come to your advantage. Now, I will say it again, Vanadium is a deck that is an underperformer. In theory, this deck looks incredible. In practicality, okay guys, we all know that one person that's a disappointment to their parents. Me. This deck is 100% a disappointment to combo players, though I will say, still takes a good pilot. Vanadium just has those free win buttons like Hot Red Dragon King Calamity and also the Cyframe Lord Omega Loop, but I think the best version of Vanadium doesn't play either of those. I think it plays a strong synchro board and then says, hey, beat me. More oftentimes than not, if you go uninterrupted, your board is ridiculous. The problem is going uninterrupted. I will give you this, players are playing that Droll and Lyrebird less, so you do have a leg up. Marine Test right now, the good thing about Marine Cess right now is that you can play a ton of hand traps and get away with it. The bad thing about Marine Cess right now, you're not as good as going second as you want to be. I don't necessarily think that Marine Cess is bad. I just think that there are probably better decks that you could be looking at right now. Kind of like how Mass Mech is not that better deck that you could be looking at. Hey, that Terahertz line is crazy enough to be a real challenge. I don't see the Bestials going away anytime soon, and players are still sideboarding them to be able to combat decks like Dragons and Branded. Yeah, this ain't going nowhere. Mass Mech Circular off the Forbidden List. Mass Mech Circular off the Forbidden List. Mass Mech Circular off the Forbidden List. That helps. And before we go any further, I just want to say, I don't think any of these decks are bad per se. This is the best decks tier list. It's just going to be about the ease of access of being able to secure wins. Pearly. Now, one thing I don't think players have noticed about Pearly is that at YCS Brazil, it was actually the most represented deck in the finals. I know, big dog, Unchained stole the show, but Pearly is secretly one of the best decks in the game. I mean, definitely secret now, because I've actually been hearing that players are saying Pearly is bad. Huh? You really gonna say these about my dogs? Fairies, foxes, cats? I definitely think that there's going to be some adjustments that have to be made, but I still would consider Pearly as one of the better decks until proven otherwise. Would not sleep on this deck whatsoever, and still would 100% respect it with the book cards. Rescue Ace, my boy. I'm in danger. My guy, I'm the little engine that could. This probably should have been the deck I took. I think Rescue Ace are a very solid choice. Rescue Ace ironically plays around some of the crazier cards in the format and does have answers to some of the top decks. And it only gets stronger when Age of Overlord comes out. I think that this deck is solidly positioned to be one of the best decks in the game. Rika, holy crap. See, there's a good thing about Rika, like being able to tribute your opponent's board. That's pretty dope. Then there's a bad thing about Rika, like people realizing how the deck plays. You get rid of the field spell, then the deck can struggle. I would say takes a really good pilot. A player that knows the ins and outs of Rika can help circumvent that problem, but that's still a really big problem that players are now aware of, and players are playing cards like Cosmic Cyclone to help you combat that. Solomon Great! This is, I mean, come on, what are we doing? This is the best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! What are we doing? Solomon Greats are the best deck! My guy, hear me out. How many decks you know from 2019 are this powerful? All right, guys, I'll stop coping. It's still the best deck. Let's go! Solomon Grades didn't necessarily have a strong showing over the course of the weekend. I think it's experimental, and it's mainly because Unchained is literally like this deck's worst nightmare. Cashtira and Brandon are no walks in the park either. Us salad boys are gonna have to figure something out before we get our salad toss. Pause. I think the hits on Sprite is definitely catching up to it, but keep in mind both Sprite Smashers and the Trap card in Sprite Double Cross, those are pretty good cards to out some of the best cards in the game. And if you were to ask me what's the best variant of Sprite that just so happens to not be Fur Hire, I would probably say Melfi. I think it's a solid choice. Sword Soul ironically has an incredible matchup against Unchained. My guy, answer me this question. What do they do to Vashuda? Am I coping? Actually, no, they really do have a pretty decent matchup against Unchained. Though we do know some of the other matchups are not as great, and Nibiru being in the format, I would say experimental, though I would watch out for this deck. It could actually make some waves in the future. Synchros we had ridiculously high. I think we bring it back to the drawing board. We already have question marks about the Calamity card that will be more than likely addressed, as well as Cyframe Lord Omega. I think that this deck is fairly solid, but the problem is going second into that Unchained board. I don't know what we're doing here. Unchained, big dog. I mean, come on, my guys. We've been talking about this tier list, trying to address what is the good counters against this strategy. This is easily the best deck in the Yu-Gi-Oh card game right now. Now, there are some things that I really want to tell you guys about Unchained, so don't get too hyped if you're an Unchained player. The hand traps that were being used over the weekend were pretty trash against Unchained, and players did take advantage, but also beware, there are some clear-cut counters to this deck. One being Fantastical Dragon Phantasme. It stops your Unchained linking off your cards, and it counters your trap card from being able to destroy your cards. It's solid. There's also some other amazing cards that players are testing in the lab, and if you guys want to see me make a meta counter guide on how to beat Unchained, let me know. I think there's some value with tier elements being able to stop special summons, as well as the Ishizu Shuffler cards, being able to get rid of some of those important cards in the graveyard. But I would say 100% experimental right now. Those tier 1 monsters can be negated by a Wave King Caesar and struggle against the cash matchup. Also, dealing with an unaffected monster is a lot harder than you would expect when this deck goes into it. And I also think that Vanquish Soul is another one of those decks that takes a really good pilot. This deck just consistently gets better and better and tops in almost every single Yu-Gi-Oh event. When the new support comes out in Age of Overload, I think that this will be primed to be one of the best decks in the game. And that's all that I have for the best decks post YCS Brazil and the events that happened over the course of the weekend. Of course, if you disagree with any of my takes, let me know down below in the comment section. What do you think? Also, if you want to see more amazing TheCaliEffect content, you already know what to do. Be sure to check out these other videos, as I'll catch you on the next one.